The GTX 780. Hot on the heels of the first GTX Titan card, people were speculative on if the next 700 series cards would be released soon after in 2013, but a video showed they didn't have to worry. The 700 series flagship dropped on May 23, 2013, just 3 months after the Titan card. On one hand, it was great timing, since the 780 was shockingly close to the Titan's performance while being 2/3 the price. On the other, Titan owners who just spent $1,000 on a card might not have been as excited for a cheaper GPU that runs close to the same. That's most of what the reviews from the time talked about as well, value compared to the Titan at least. Well, that and the cooler design. I mean, how could you see this new cooler and not talk about it? It just looks so cool. Another thing we'll be talking about is, of course, the specs of this card. The GTX 780 features 2,304 shading units, paired with 3 GB of GDDR5 memory on a 384-bit bus. The core runs at a base of 863 MHz and boost of 902, with the memory clocked at 1502 MHz. Total board power is around 250 watts, which is actually a lot higher than most of the cards I run, although this was a flagship versus a more budget-friendly option. Although I got this card for around $40, so not that far off from the others on the channel. Oh, and like most of the 700 series, this card is based on the Kepler architecture, and its last driver is from 2024. Those old drivers may prove to be a problem, along with the fact that this card doesn't have full DirectX 12 support, only the most rudimentary implementation of it. We'll see how much of a problem that becomes later though. The benchmark PC is, of course, the same. Intel Core i7-8700 non-K, paired with 32 GB of dual-channel DDR4 running at 3000 MHz. Two things of note. First off, when I received the card, it actually wasn't working at all, even with drivers installed. Turns out the BIOS was all whacked up somehow, according to GPU-Z. So I downloaded NVFlash and reflashed the BIOS with a close-to-stock one. First time doing it, but it seems to have worked since Windows then picked it up and started displaying on next boot. Fun experience, I gotta say. And second, of course I overclocked it before any of the benchmarks. Just a simple one, running Heaven and bringing up the clocks as high as I could before artifacting. We ended up with plus 150 MHz on the core and plus 100 on the memory. Although I'm sure with voltage tweaking, someone else could get it much higher. I like to think my method is very noob-friendly. So, with the whole preamble out of the way, it's time to see how the GTX 780 is holding up in some common and some more niche games, and if it can even still boot them. Let's kick things off, starting with Cyberpunk 2077. Running the game at native 1600x900 with the low preset, we got 34.4 FPS average with 1% lows down to 25.2. Gotta say, not a fantastic start for this card, especially considering its original reputation for shredding. Also doesn't bode very well for the other 700 series cards if this is the best there was to offer. Running at 1080p, it would get lower than 30 FPS average if the game rendered at all. If the settings are too high and you exceed the VRAM, the whole world disappears and you're just left with the effects. Kind of freaky hearing the game in the background while the world is all just darkness. Here we've got a new game added to the repertoire with Valheim. Running on the medium preset and native 1080p, we got a pretty decent result, 67.5 FPS average with lows to 41.2. Okay, so maybe a little stuttery, and that's in a world without any crazy buildings or anything, but hey, for a good-looking game with a lot to do, that's not bad. Plus, I didn't really feel any frame rate issues while I was playing. Might look into getting a world with a little more going on just for benchmark's sake, but we'll see. And worst case, if late game it gets laggy, this is with medium, so you can definitely drop down to low. Now onto a mainstay with Deep Rock Galactic. Running at 1080p on Ultra, using DirectX 11, we were returned with actually an incredible result, 133.8 FPS average with 1% lows to 129.6. Super stable frame times and a super high average to boot. That's actually really close to the RX 570 I reviewed last, which was a GPU released in 2017, literally a 4-year gap. Not to mention that 570 was overclocked to be closer to a 580, so that's pretty damn impressive. Maybe this GTX 780 specialty is in DirectX games. DirectX 11, that is. Carrying that win to BeamNG at 1080p native on the normal preset, we got 72 average with 58 lows. Again, kind of a powerhouse of a GPU, especially since it's from 2013, which was, oh man, 13 years ago, yikes. But hey, another win for the 780. Seems like so far the only thing holding this card back is DirectX 12 support and up-to-date drivers. More on that later. Next up is Risk of Rain 2. Running 1080p max settings with Artifact of Swarms on stage 1, we had 121.1 FPS average with 83.9 lows. Again, long runs will definitely have an impact on frame rate, and you may need to drop settings to maintain 60 FPS or higher, but it also shows that as long as the card is supported, the games run great. No significant stutters or issues to talk on. Now another surprise game with No Man's Sky. Running at 900p native with the standard preset on my base planet, we got 22.3 average with lows to 19.4. Not a great experience, and dropping the resolution scale all the way to 10% and changing the resolution to 720p only got us marginally more frames, so this is really as good as it gets for the 700 series. Except for the 780 Ti, I suppose. On space stations, it ran a little more like 30 FPS, and in space I even saw it hit 60. But the place you're spending most of the game, the planets, runs not great. One more random game with Astroneer. While it might have fallen off a little in recent years, Starseeker and the newest DLC make it a little rough for sure, and for good reason. I still think the base game itself is pretty good. I used to spend days at a time just grinding for resources. With that said, 1080p and high settings with the high quality settings shown on screen now, we had 69.4 FPS average and 44.6 for our 1% lows. For the most part, it ran great, although swinging the camera around my base did cause a few dips just for loading new objects in. But again, as long as the game supports the card, it's pretty good. Onto a competitive title with Counter-Strike 2. Running 1080p with low everything and high dynamic shadows in the Workshop benchmark map. We had an average of 225.3 with 1% lows to 123.6. Overall stable and quick, especially for the game immediately telling me the graphics driver was out of date. And for the 4x3 mode, the closest resolution I could get was, for some reason, 1400 by 1050. I didn't see 1440 by 1080 on there, so this is the one we're using. Running that with the same settings, we got slightly more frames, 279.9 average, with lows only marginally better at 128.5. For a card this old, that's still pretty solid performance. And finally, onto a classic with Minecraft. Running 1080p with Sodium and Iris, with the complementary reimagined shader applied on the medium preset, we were finally returned with 58.6 FPS average with 1% lows down to 46.3. From a card from 2013, that's pretty impressive. And just every time I play with shaders, I'm reminded of just how gorgeous shaders can make the world look. And now to mention the games that didn't work. Forza 6 didn't launch, of course, but I really was hoping it would. I want to see what cards these days can still run the latest, even if they're below the minimum spec. But a much bigger surprise was that Forza 5 didn't launch either. The last driver version for this card is just a smidge too old, and I can't get the latest one to install at all. Doesn't detect this card. I tried to ignore the warning, but the game runs with DirectX 12, basically the bane of any 700 series card. And Helldivers 2 had an issue as well with DirectX 12, and even DirectX 11. I tried that in the Steam launch settings. Just crashed immediately either way. So it seems if they only support DX12, you're most likely out of luck nowadays. A shame, since any DX11 game shows that this card still has a lot to offer. Speaking of which, it's finally time to talk raw synthetic numbers with 3D Mark. Running Firestrike, we got a score of 11,182, which puts it in between the 964 gig and the 1066 gig. TimeSpy reinforces that with 3031, also smack dab in the middle of the two. And Steel Nomad doesn't run. No real surprise, Steel Nomad uses a more full feature set of DX12, and we've already discussed that's an issue with this card since we only have the very basic set. It could also be the old driver issue as well. At least it still performs well in games or benchmarks that it can run. And that's really the conclusion here. The GTX 780 is extremely powerful in anything that it can run, namely DirectX 11 games or probably anything 2D like Terraria or Factorio. The biggest thing holding this GPU back, and any in the 700 series for that matter, is the final driver not supporting it in newer games and the lackluster DX12 support. And I just know that if this had proper support for it, this GPU would still be kicking some serious frames to this day. So if you're running newer games, you gotta double check that a 700 series card can launch it. But if your library consists of games that still use DX11, this card can still push out some serious performance and may be worth it if you can find a good deal for it.